I want to talk to you guys about a 1927 Supreme Court decision called Buck versus Bell. Young 18-year-old Carrie Buck. She was born to a woman by the name of Emma Buck, who supposedly lived a life as a prostitute. And Emma was deemed as mentally unfit, mentally feeble. And these were the types of terms that they would label people with in this era, in the first half of the 20th century. And this was due to eugenic ideology. You know, this person is genetically unfit or feeble-minded and therefore should not be allowed to have children. Anyway, when Carrie Buck was born, she was given to a foster family. And a member of this foster family raped her. And her foster family said, "Oh, look, she's a whore. Look, she's screwing around." So Carrie Buck was eventually put into some kind of institute for the feeble-minded in the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, as they call it. And the person who was superintending the institution deemed her as feeble-minded and unfit to have children. But here's the thing, when Buck was raped, she was impregnated. They accused her of whoring around and being a degenerate and doing things that a dysfunctional person would do, but the reality was that she was raped. And the foster family wanted a way to cover up the crime that one of their members did to her. So they said, "Oh, she's feeble-minded. Oh, she's just a whore." So the superintendent of the institution for the feeble-minded, he said, well, she needs to be sterilized so that she will never have children again because we cannot allow her terrible genes to be passed on. Eventually, the superintendent passed away, and he was replaced by a guy by the name of John Hendren Bell, hence the name of the Supreme Court case, Buck versus Bell. And Bell wanted this girl sterilized. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the ruling was in favor for sterilization, and it was an 8-1 decision. Only one judge dissented from this. The most prominent of the judges who supported sterilization, obligatory sterilization, was Oliver Wendell Holmes, who to this day is considered to be quite an infamous Supreme Court justice. Oliver Wendell Holmes was a strong believer in eugenics. Most of the judges, pretty much all the judges with the exception of one, concluded that mandatory sterilization did not violate the Constitution, therefore, or really thereby, constitutionalizing mandatory sterilization. Carrie Buck was sterilized. Her daughter was allowed to be born, and her daughter ended up being an honor student at her school, even though her daughter was also deemed as mentally feeble and unfit. Carrie Buck would eventually die in the 1980s, but she was also an avid reader until her death, or to her death. People who are mentally feeble or handicapped aren't really, they're not exactly avid readers. The whole thing really was, it was a kangaroo court. In fact, Carrie Buck's lawyer, Mr. Whitehead, was a strong believer in eugenics and would eventually oversee or would eventually actually support this girl getting sterilized and saw to it that it happened. So the whole thing was arranged so that mandatory sterilization would become constitutionalized. They wanted this despotic ruling to occur. And across the Atlantic Ocean in Germany, the Nazis were reading about all this stuff. The Nazis read about Buck versus Bell, and Hitler was actually very impressed that the U.S. Supreme Court made this ruling. And the Germans says, oh, look, the Americans, they are doing the right thing. We should do the same thing here. And the Germans also implemented their own eugenic policy, but they went full throttle with it, and they murdered millions of people, and they did human experimentation. But here's my point. My point is that America has a history of setting precedents and normalizing things that are evil and despotic, like eugenics. Also, the segregation laws of the South also inspired the Nazis. And it really makes you wonder what is happening right now with the Azov Battalion. Before, when the Azov Battalion first became known to the public, the Azov Battalion was portrayed as a neo-Nazi paramilitary organization. Far-right, ultra-nationalistic, racist Nazi paramilitary group. Now it's considered a defender of Ukraine against the evil Russians. What kind of example are we setting, or really what kind of example is the media setting when it portrays these Nazis as heroes or the defenders of their people against the evil Russians? You might as well just bash the Russians for fighting ISIS. Oh, wait. Yeah, that actually happened. Yeah. When Russia was in Syria fighting ISIS, the media also took the opportunity to bash Russia. Oh, look, Russia is in Syria. Oh, this is terrible, when Russia was fighting terrorists. What are we seeing? We are seeing the normalization of fascist groups, the normalization of fascism. And that's my cat meowing. He wants to get out. He's kind of a drama queen. And so if a fascist organization, a fascist military organization, can be portrayed as heroic, because I've seen all of the advertisements online. Help the defenders of the Azovstal. By the way, the Azov fighters all surrendered. But for weeks, I've been hearing about, oh, Azovstal, defender, let's support the defenders of Azovstal. It's like, well, they're Nazis. Yeah, but doesn't matter. What matters is they're fighting Russia. Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad. Okay, so then we should be praising Hitler because Hitler was the biggest enemy of the Soviet Union. It's just insane. It really is insane. But that's what we're doing. When we do things like this, when we say, "Oh, it's in this context, it's okay. In this instance, it's okay because Russia bad." Well, that was the very same line of reasoning that people had when they collaborated with the Nazis or when they supported the Nazis. Russia bad. And that's what we're seeing. We are seeing the normalization of fascism, or really of we're seeing a desensitization to these groups being made. What's next? You could have fascism rise up in Germany, and people will say, well, it's okay because Russia bad. Putin is bad. just like America made a justification for eugenics and the Germans followed, today we are seeing people in the United States and in other Western countries making arguments for a fascist organization, military organization like Azov, thereby normalizing it. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.